The scorching New Mexico sun beat down mercilessly as Tom Whitehorse dismounted from his Mustang, Cisco, to examine the tracks pressed deep into the sandy desert floor. 3 sets of horseshoe prints, moving fast toward the Badlands where decent folk rarely ventured. But it was the 4th set that made his weathered jaw clench with concern. Lighter impressions, unshod hoof prints that could only belong to an Apache pony. Tom Whitehorse was a walking contradiction in the harsh frontier landscape, 32 years old with the piercing green eyes of his Irish father and the bronze skin of his Mescalero Apache mother. The territorial ranger badge pinned to his worn leather vest marked him as a lawman, but his mixed heritage made him a perpetual outsider in both the white settlements and Apache camps scattered across the territory. They called him Ghost Walker because he moved between 2 worlds without truly belonging to either, trusted by necessity but never fully accepted. The trail led him through increasingly treacherous terrain, winding between towering red rock formations that created natural corridors perfect for ambushes. Tom's calloused hand rested instinctively on the worn walnut grip of his Colt .44, while his experienced eyes constantly scanned the canyon walls above for any sign of movement. 20 years of surviving on the unforgiving frontier had taught him that silence in the desert often meant deadly trouble was brewing. His horse snorted nervously, ears pricked forward as they rounded a sharp bend in the canyon. Then Tom heard it, a young woman's cry of pain echoing off the stone walls like a ghost's lament, followed by harsh masculine laughter that made his blood run cold with anger and determination. The scene that greeted him was one he'd witnessed too many times during his years as a territorial ranger, but it never got easier to stomach or ignore. 3 rough-looking men in dusty trail clothes and worn boots surrounded a young Apache girl who couldn't have been more than 17 years old. Her hands were bound tightly behind her back with braided rawhide. Blood trickled from a fresh gash on her forehead, and her traditional buckskin dress was torn at the shoulder. Despite her desperate situation, her dark eyes blazed with the kind of fierce defiance that reminded Tom of cornered wildcats he'd encountered in the mountains. Jake Sutter, a scarred bounty hunter whose name appeared on wanted posters throughout the territory, stood menacingly over the captive girl with a braided rawhide whip clutched in his meaty fist. His pockmarked face bore the marks of too many barroom brawls and too much cheap whiskey, and his yellowed smile revealed teeth that had seen far better decades. "Come on now, little Apache princess," Sutter was saying, his gravelly voice carrying false sweetness that made Tom's skin crawl with revulsion. "Just tell us where your daddy keeps his camp hidden, and this whole unpleasant business can be over real quick like. Hell, we might even consider letting you ride back to your people afterward, if you cooperate nicely." The girl gathered what moisture she could in her parched mouth and spat at him with impressive accuracy, hitting Sutter square in his scarred face. "I would die 1,000 deaths before helping white dogs like you find my people," she declared in accented but perfectly clear English, her voice ringing with proud defiance. Sutter wiped the spittle from his cheek with the back of his hand, his expression darkening like storm clouds gathering over the mountains. "That can definitely be arranged, you little savage. But first, you're going to tell us exactly what we want to know, one way or another." He raised the whip menacingly, preparing to strike. "That's far enough, Sutter," Tom called out sharply, his authoritative voice carrying across the canyon like a rifle shot. His Winchester was leveled steadily at the bounty hunter's chest, as solid and unwavering as granite despite his racing heartbeat. The 3 men spun around with the quick, predatory reflexes of dangerous animals, their hands automatically moving toward the weapons at their hips. Sutter's 2 companions, a thin, nervous-looking man with twitchy eyes that darted constantly, and a heavy-set brute with arms thick as tree trunks, flanked their leader with practiced, deadly efficiency. Sutter's scarred face split into an unpleasant grin that held no warmth or humor. "Well, well, if it ain't the famous Ghost Walker himself, riding to the rescue like some kind of dime novel hero. This here's none of your official business, half-breed. We're conducting perfectly legitimate commerce." "Kidnapping and torturing a young girl?" Tom kept his rifle trained steadily on Sutter's center mass, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. "That's your definition of legitimate business?" "She ain't just any ordinary girl," Sutter said, his confidence growing as he realized Tom was completely alone and outnumbered. "This here's Chief Nailnish's own daughter, and the Army's got a standing bounty on any information about his whereabouts and activities. She's worth more hard cash money than you'll see in 10 years of honest ranger work." Tom felt his blood turn to ice water in his veins. Chief Nailnish was one of the most respected and influential leaders among the free Apache bands, a man who had consistently advocated for peaceful coexistence while never surrendering his people's fundamental dignity or ancestral rights. If these animals had kidnapped his beloved daughter, it could easily spark a territorial war that would consume innocent lives for years to come. "All the more reason to let her go immediately and right away," Tom said, his voice steady and controlled despite the gravity of the rapidly developing situation. "You harm Chief Nailnish's daughter in any way, and every Apache warrior within 100 miles will be hunting you like rabid wolves. That's not bounty money you're looking at, Sutter. That's a guaranteed death sentence." The girl's intelligent eyes widened slightly with surprise as she heard Tom speak her father's name with genuine respect rather than the contempt or fearful hatred that most white men displayed. She studied his weathered face intently, perhaps seeing something there that gave her the first glimmer of hope she'd felt in days. "Maybe that's true," Sutter admitted with a careless shrug. "But we got her right here and right now, and that's all that really matters in this business. 3 experienced guns against 1 lone ranger ain't particularly good odds, even for a famous gunfighter like yourself." Tom's green eyes never wavered from Sutter's face, reading the calculation and growing confidence there. "I've faced considerably worse odds with much meaner and more dangerous men than you 3. The only question that matters now is which one of you wants to be the first to die today." The tension in the narrow canyon stretched taut as a bowstring ready to snap. Tom could see the cold calculation in Sutter's weathered eyes, weighing the substantial potential reward against the very real and immediate possibility of a violent death. The bounty hunter had built his reputation on brutality and intimidation, but he'd survived this long by knowing when the tactical odds were stacked against him. "Tell you what, half-breed," Sutter said finally, his tone becoming falsely reasonable. "You just turn that horse around and ride away now. Forget you ever saw us or this girl, and we'll make sure she don't suffer too much before we turn her over to the Army boys. Everybody walks away satisfied, and nobody has to die today." "Everybody except her," Tom replied grimly. "And everybody except the innocent people who'll die when her father comes looking for bloody revenge. I'm going to ask you one final time, Sutter. Cut the girl loose immediately and ride away while you still can. This is your last chance to walk away from this situation alive." The bounty hunter's scarred hand moved deliberately toward the worn grip of his revolver, and Tom knew with absolute certainty that the talking was finally over. The gunfight erupted with the sudden, devastating violence of a desert thunderstorm. Sutter was genuinely fast with his weapon, his hand moving in a blur of practiced motion, but Tom had been honing his reflexes since early childhood, and 20 years of life-or-death encounters on the frontier had made him faster than the striking rattlesnake. His Colt .44 cleared leather and spoke once with authority, the heavy lead bullet catching Sutter squarely in the chest and spinning him backward into the canyon wall with brutal, final impact. The thin man to Tom's left fired wildly in his panic, his hastily aimed shot chipping rock inches from Tom's head and sending sharp stone fragments flying through the air. Tom's second shot was more deliberate and precise, the bullet finding its intended target dead center and dropping the nervous gunman like a sack of grain. The heavy-set brute had been lunging toward the Apache girl, clearly intending to use her as a human shield against Tom's deadly accurate fire, when Tom's rifle cracked with thunderous authority. The heavy bullet took the man high in his left shoulder, spinning him around violently, but not immediately dropping him to the ground. He roared like a wounded grizzly bear and charged directly at Tom with a wicked-looking knife gleaming in his massive fist. Tom sidestepped the clumsy, pain-maddened attack with fluid grace and brought his rifle, but down hard on the back of the man's skull. The bounty hunter collapsed face-first into the sandy canyon floor, unconscious, but still breathing heavily. The entire deadly confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds, but Tom's ears were ringing painfully from the multiple gunshots echoing and re-echoing in the confined space of the narrow canyon. He quickly and methodically checked each of the fallen men, 2 permanently dead, 1 unconscious, but likely to survive. It wasn't the first time he'd been forced to kill in the line of duty, but taking a human life never got any easier, even when that life belonged to men who richly deserved killing. The Apache girl was watching him with wide, intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul, her bound hands working frantically at the tight rawhide that held them captive. Tom approached her slowly and carefully, his movements deliberate and non-threatening, his hands clearly visible and empty of any weapons. "Easy now," he said gently and carefully pronounced Apache, drawing on the language lessons his mother had given him as a child. "I'm not going to hurt you in any way. You're completely safe now." She stopped struggling against her bonds and studied his face with the focused intensity of someone trying to read a man's true character and intentions. "You speak the sacred language of the people," she said in English, her voice carrying a mixture of surprise and cautious, growing hope. "But you wear the clothes and badge of our enemies." "I wear the clothes of a man trying to keep the peace between all peoples," Tom replied honestly, drawing his sharp skinning knife to cut through her restraints. "What's your name?" "Kaya," she said simply, rubbing her raw wrists gratefully as the tight ropes finally fell away. "Daughter of Chief Nailnish of the Chiricahua Band. And you are the one they call Ghost Walker, the ranger who walks between the white world and the Apache world like a spirit." Tom nodded acknowledgement, his experienced eyes constantly checking the canyon around them for any signs of additional threats or approaching danger. "Tom Whitehorse, and right now, we need to get you somewhere safe before more trouble finds us. Can you ride?" Kaya nodded toward one of the horses tied securely nearby. "The bay mare with the white blaze is mine. Those animals stole her when they captured me from near our winter camp 3 days ago." Tom's expression darkened with concern and growing anger. "Did they attack your camp directly?" "No," Kaya said, her voice hardening with bitter anger and the sting of betrayal. "They paid one of our own people to deliver me to them like a piece of livestock, a man named Chato, who was jealous of my father's wise leadership and thought he could gain favor with the white authorities by betraying the chief's own daughter for bounty money." The implications of her words hit Tom like a physical blow to his stomach. If there was a traitor operating within Chief Nailnish's own band, someone willing to sell the chief's beloved daughter for white man's gold, then the delicate and fragile peace that currently existed in the territory was far more precarious than anyone had realized. As they prepared to leave the bloodstained canyon, mounting their horses and gathering essential supplies from the dead bounty hunters, Tom noticed multiple columns of dark smoke rising ominously from several widely scattered points on the distant horizon. His experienced heart sank as he realized exactly what those carefully spaced fires meant. "Cooking fires," Kaya said quietly, following his concerned gaze and understanding his obvious worry. "My people are preparing for war." The Apache camp sat nestled securely in a natural amphitheater of towering red rock formations, strategically positioned to provide both effective concealment from potential enemies and commanding views of all possible approaches across the desert floor. As Tom and Kaya rode carefully down the narrow, winding trail that led to the hidden settlement, Tom could feel the weight of countless unseen eyes upon them, warriors posted as vigilant sentries in the rocks high above, watching every movement with the deadly intensity of hunting hawks. The camp itself was considerably larger than Tom had expected, with perhaps 150 people visible among the traditional wickiups and several canvas military tents that had obviously been taken from defeated cavalry patrols. Children played games between the dwellings, while women tended cooking fires and worked on various essential crafts. But it was the intimidating sight in the center of the camp that made Tom's blood run cold with apprehension. 50 Apache warriors stood in a perfect, disciplined circle, each one painted for war with traditional symbols rendered in red, white, and black pigments. Golden eagle feathers adorned their long black hair, and every man carried weapons that showed the distinctive wear and patina of extensive combat use: rifles, war clubs, knives, and traditional bows capable of driving an arrow completely through a man's body at 50 yards. These weren't young hotheads eager for glory and recognition. These were seasoned, experienced fighters, men who had survived countless battles and earned their place among the Apache elite through demonstrated courage, skill, and wisdom. At the center of this intimidating circle stood Chief Nailnish himself, a dignified man of perhaps 55 years, whose natural bearing spoke of absolute authority earned through decades of wise and courageous leadership. His gray-streaked hair was adorned with the magnificent tail feathers of a golden eagle, symbols of his high rank and spiritual power, and his deeply weathered face was painted with the geometric symbols that indicated his readiness for war. When his keen eyes found his daughter approaching safely, profound relief flooded his weathered features, but his penetrating gaze quickly shifted to Tom with the focused intensity of a man evaluating a potential threat to his people. "Father," Kaya called out clearly in Apache as they entered the camp, her strong voice carrying easily across the sudden, expectant silence that had fallen over the entire settlement. "I have returned safely to you, and I bring with me the brave man who saved my life and protected my honor." The imposing circle of warriors parted like water to allow them passage, but Tom could feel the electric tension crackling in the air like the charged atmosphere before a violent thunderstorm. Weathered hands rested casually but meaningfully on weapon grips, and more than one warrior's hard eyes held the cold, unwavering promise of swift violence should Tom make any movement that could be interpreted as threatening. Tom dismounted slowly and deliberately, his every movement carefully designed to show proper respect rather than fear or weakness. He had found himself in similar dangerous situations several times during his years as a territorial ranger, but never before with stakes this monumentally high. Chief Nailnish was known and respected throughout the territory as a man of unshakable honor and profound wisdom, but he was also a loving father whose precious daughter had been kidnapped, threatened, and very nearly sold to the army like a piece of valuable livestock. "Ghost Walker," Chief Nailnish said in carefully pronounced and dignified English, his naturally powerful voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a man born to command respect. "My beloved daughter tells me that you rescued her from evil white men who would have sold her to our enemies like a horse or rifle to be traded for profit." "It was the right thing to do," Tom replied simply and honestly, meeting the chief's penetrating eyes directly but respectfully. Any decent man worthy of the name would have done exactly the same thing. "The right thing," Chief Nailnish repeated slowly and thoughtfully, as if carefully tasting each word for its true meaning. An interesting and unexpected concept coming from a man who serves the same territorial government that has placed bounties on Apache scalps and systematically driven our people from lands our ancestors have hunted successfully for 1,000 years. Tom felt the oppressive weight of 50 pairs of suspicious eyes watching and analyzing his every gesture and expression, searching for any sign of deception, weakness, or hostile intent. What he said in the next few crucial minutes would determine not only whether he left this heavily defended camp alive, but whether the entire territory would see devastating war or blessed peace in the days to come. "I serve justice and the law as it should be," Tom said carefully, choosing each word with the precision of a man walking on dangerously thin ice. Not the corrupt and greedy men who would twist and pervert those sacred concepts for their own profit and political advancement. A young warrior with the lean, dangerous build of a born fighter stepped forward aggressively, his calloused hand resting meaningfully on the grip of a cavalry saber he'd obviously taken from a defeated soldier in battle. "And what of the law that puts gold pieces on our scalps like we were wild animals? What of the justice that pays white men good money to hunt us like beasts and steal our children to sell as slaves in distant markets?" "Chaska," Chief Nailnish said quietly, but his voice carried more than enough natural authority to freeze the angry young warrior completely in place. "Our guest will have his full opportunity to speak his mind and explain his actions." Tom looked around the intimidating circle slowly and deliberately, meeting the hard eyes of each seasoned warrior in turn, reading the complex mixture of justified suspicion, righteous anger, and genuine curiosity written clearly in their weathered faces. These were men who had seen their families brutally killed, their ancestral land systematically stolen, their entire way of life ruthlessly destroyed by the relentlessly advancing tide of white settlement and so-called civilization. They had every possible reason to hate him on sight, and absolutely no reason to trust anything he might say. "I know exactly what some white men have done to your people over the years," Tom said, his voice carrying the unmistakable weight of genuine emotion and personal understanding. "I've seen the horrific aftermath of massacres, the burned villages still smoking, the families torn apart forever by greed, hatred, and the lust for land and gold. I know that there are powerful men in the territorial government and the army who profit handsomely from perpetual war, who see Apache deaths as golden opportunities for advancement and wealth." "Pretty words from a man who wears the badge of our oppressors," said another warrior, this one an older, scarred veteran whose broad chest bore the distinctive marks of bullet wounds and knife fights survived. "But flowery words do not bring back the dead, or heal the wounded, or feed the hungry children forced onto reservations where they slowly starve on government rations." "No, they don't," Tom agreed without hesitation or defensiveness. "But actions do make a difference. And today, my actions were to save Chief Nailnish's daughter from evil men who would have used her as bait to bring destruction and death upon your people." Chief Nailnish studied Tom for a long, tense moment that seemed to stretch on forever, his weathered face giving no hint of his inner thoughts or eventual decision. "Why?" he asked finally, his single word carrying the crushing weight of a lifetime's worth of betrayal, broken promises, and systematic oppression. "Why would you risk your own life for an Apache girl you had never met? Your own people will brand you a traitor to your race, and there are those who will put a substantial price on your head for interfering with what they consider perfectly legitimate business." Tom thought carefully of all the acceptable reasons he could give: duty, justice, the sacred oath he'd sworn as a territorial ranger to protect all innocent people. But in the end, standing before these proud and dignified warriors who had sacrificed everything to defend their people's freedom and way of life, he chose to give them the complete, unvarnished truth. "Because when I was just 8 years old, Apache warriors saved my life," he said, his voice thick with powerful memory and lasting gratitude. "My mother was Mescalero Apache, and when white raiders attacked our small, peaceful camp one terrible winter night, it was Apache fighters who held them off long enough for my mother and me to escape safely into the mountains." A murmur of surprise and interest ran through the circle of warriors, like wind through tall pine trees. Tom's mixed heritage was widely known throughout the territory, but very few people knew the specific, painful details of his childhood or understood the deep debt of gratitude he carried. "What happened to your mother?" Kaya asked softly, her voice carrying genuine compassion and concern. "She died of fever 3 years later, during a particularly harsh winter when we had little food and no proper shelter," Tom replied, the old pain still sharp and immediate after all these years. "But she lived long enough to teach me that courage and honor aren't determined by the color of a person's skin or the language they speak. She taught me that a man's true worth is measured by his willingness to stand up for what's right, even when it costs him everything he has in this world." Chief Nailnish nodded slowly and thoughtfully, his keen eyes showing a glimmer of something that might have been growing approval and respect. "Your mother was clearly a wise woman, and she raised you well according to the old ways. Those are good words, words that honor both our peoples and their finest traditions." He paused significantly, then continued with obvious reluctance. "But wisdom and good intentions alone will not solve the serious problems that face us now. Colonel Matthews at Fort Stanton has placed official bounties on the heads of Apache leaders, and he has convinced weak men among our own people to betray us for white man's gold. War is coming, Ghost Walker, whether any of us want it or not." "It doesn't have to be that way," Tom said, leaning forward slightly in his urgent desire to make them understand. "There are other paths available, other solutions that don't require the spilling of innocent blood." "Such as what?" asked the scarred veteran, his voice carrying deep skepticism born of bitter experience and repeated betrayal. Tom took a deep breath, knowing he was about to propose something that could be seen as either salvation or betrayal by these suspicious warriors. "Let me take a formal message to Judge Harrison in Santa Fe. He's an honest man, a genuinely fair man, and he has the legal authority to investigate Colonel Matthews' activities thoroughly and hold him accountable for any illegal actions. If I can prove conclusively that Matthews is operating outside the bounds of military law, offering illegal bounties, and deliberately inciting violence for his own purposes, the territorial government will have no choice but to act decisively against him. Chief Nailnish considered this unexpected proposal carefully, his withered face giving absolutely no hint of his thoughts or inclinations. And if your Judge Harrison refuses to act, if he chooses to protect his fellow white man rather than seek justice for Apache grievances, then you'll know for certain that the path of war is your only remaining option, Tom said with complete honesty. But at least you'll know that you tried for peace first, that you gave justice one final chance to work before turning to violence and bloodshed. The circle of warriors began to murmur among themselves, their voices rising and falling in animated discussion conducted in rapid, flowing Apache. Tom caught fragments of the intense conversation, some voices advocating for immediate war, others suggesting that the White Ranger's proposal might be worth attempting, still others questioning whether any white man could be trusted to keep his word when the stakes were high. The debate continued for several minutes, with Chief Nailnish listening carefully and respectfully to all viewpoints, before raising his authoritative hand for immediate silence. The respect these hardened warriors showed their wise leader was absolute and instant. You ask us to place our trust in white man's justice after generations of broken treaties and betrayed promises, the chief said slowly and deliberately. You ask us to believe that this time will be different, that your people will choose honor over profit. Why should we take such a dangerous risk when bitter experience has taught us that white men's words are like smoke on the wind? Because I give you my personal word of honor as a man, Tom replied, removing his territorial ranger badge and holding it out toward the chief. And because if I betray that sacred trust, if I fail to return, or if I return with empty promises and false hope, you know exactly where to find me to extract whatever payment you deem appropriate. Kaya stepped forward, her voice clear and strong with conviction. Father, this man fought 3 armed killers to save my life, when he could have simply ridden away and avoided all danger. He risked everything to do what was right when he had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Chief Nailnish looked around the circle of warriors slowly, reading the weathered faces of his most trusted fighters and advisors with the skill of a lifetime's leadership. The young warrior Chaska nodded reluctantly, as if acknowledging that the proposal had genuine merit despite his burning desire for immediate action. The scarred veteran shrugged, a gesture that seemed to say the plan was worth attempting before resorting to inevitable warfare. One by one, the other warriors added their silent agreement, some enthusiastic, others grudging, but all willing to follow their chief's final decision. Very well, Ghost Walker, Chief Nailnish said finally, his voice carrying the weight of momentous decision. You have earned the right to try your plan through your courage and honor. We will give you 2 weeks to reach Santa Fe, present our case to your judge, and return with his honest answer. But understand this clearly. If you do not return within that time, or if you return bearing nothing but excuses and empty promises, we will assume that you have betrayed our trust, and then we will paint our faces for war and take back by force what has been stolen from us. Tom nodded solemnly, understanding the enormous weight of responsibility he was accepting. I'll return with a real answer, one way or another. You have my sacred word. As Tom prepared to leave the camp, checking his weapons and supplies for the long, dangerous ride ahead, Kaya approached him quietly. You are taking a tremendous risk, she said, her voice soft but concerned, for people who are not truly your own, despite your mixed blood. They're my people, Tom replied firmly, just as much as the white settlers I've sworn to protect. That's the burden of walking between 2 worlds. You have to care deeply about both of them, even when they can't see past their differences to care about each other. Chief Nailnish stepped forward and placed a strong hand on Tom's shoulder, a gesture of respect and acceptance that carried deep meaning. Go with the blessing of the Apache people, Ghost Walker. Know that whatever happens in the days to come, you have earned the genuine respect of 50 warriors today. That is not something given lightly or forgotten easily. The territorial courthouse in Santa Fe represented everything civilized about frontier government, Thick adobe walls that had weathered decades of legal proceedings, polished wooden floors that had heard the footsteps of judges and lawyers seeking truth and justice, and tall windows that let in the pure, clear mountain light of New Mexico's high country. Judge Jeremiah Harrison's private chambers were an island of learned order in the often chaotic world of territorial politics, filled with leather-bound law books, carefully organized legal documents, and the kind of substantial furniture that spoke of Eastern refinement successfully transplanted to the wild frontier. Tom sat across from the distinguished silver-haired judge, his dusty trail clothes and worn leather chaps creating a sharp contrast to the civilized surroundings. He had ridden hard for 3 full days to reach Santa Fe, stopping only when absolutely necessary to rest his horse and grab a few hours of desperately needed sleep. Time was running short, and he could feel the weight of Chief Nailnish's 2-week deadline pressing down on him like a physical burden. Judge Harrison set down the detailed report Tom had written during his first night in town, his weathered face grave with deep concern. "These are extremely serious accusations, Ranger Whitehorse. You're claiming that Colonel Matthews has been operating an illegal bounty system, paying civilian hunters to bring in Apache scalps in direct violation of both territorial and federal law." "Not claiming, Your Honor, stating as documented fact," Tom replied with absolute conviction. "I have solid eyewitness testimony, and I brought back one of the bounty hunters alive. He's currently sitting in the territorial jail, and he's willing to testify about the entire illegal operation in exchange for a reduced sentence." The judge leaned back thoughtfully in his leather chair, his fingers steepled in front of him as he considered the serious implications. "And what about Chief Nailnish's daughter? Where is she now?" "Safe with her people, where she belongs," Tom said firmly. "But that's not the real issue here. The point is that Colonel Matthews is operating completely outside the bounds of military authority, and his illegal actions are pushing the Apache bands toward a war that could consume this entire territory." "War might be inevitable regardless," Harrison said quietly, his voice heavy with the burden of political realities. "The territorial government is under enormous pressure from Washington to resolve what they're calling the Apache problem once and for all. There are powerful forces in the capital who believe that total warfare is the only permanent solution." Tom felt his heart sink at the judge's sobering words. "Is that what you believe, Your Honor?" Judge Harrison stood and walked to the tall window overlooking the bustling plaza, where merchants hawked their wares and children played in the warm afternoon sunshine. "What I believe, Ranger, is that the law must be applied equally to all people, regardless of their race, rank, or political connections. If Colonel Matthews is operating outside his legal authority, then he must be held accountable for his actions, no matter how politically inconvenient that might prove to be." "Then you'll issue a warrant for his arrest?" "I'll do considerably more than that," Harrison said, turning back to face Tom with determination burning in his eyes. "I'll convene a full territorial hearing to investigate his activities and determine the extent of his illegal operations. But I'll need more evidence than just the testimony of one captured bounty hunter and your word as a witness, no matter how much I personally trust your integrity and judgment." Tom's mind began racing through possibilities. What kind of additional evidence would you need? Documentation, written orders authorizing these bounty payments, financial records showing illegal disbursements of government funds. Harrison returned to his desk, his expression deadly serious. The kind of evidence that would be kept in Colonel Matthews' personal files at Fort Stanton. "You're asking me to infiltrate a United States military installation," Tom said slowly, understanding the full implications of what the judge was suggesting. "I'm asking you to do your job as a duly appointed territorial ranger," Harrison replied carefully. "You have the legal authority to investigate suspected crimes within your jurisdiction, and if those crimes happen to involve military personnel operating outside their lawful authority, then that's where your investigation must lead you." Tom stood, grasping what the judge was really asking him to do. "And if I'm caught trying to gather this evidence?" "Then you'll be completely on your own," Harrison said bluntly. "I cannot officially sanction any kind of raid or infiltration of a military facility. But if you were to happen upon evidence of criminal activity during the normal course of your law enforcement duties, I understand perfectly, Tom said. He had less than 10 days remaining before his promised return to Chief Nailnish, and Fort Stanton was a hard 3-day ride from Santa Fe through some of the most unforgiving country in the territory. That night, Tom approached Fort Stanton with all the stealth and cunning he'd learned during 20 years of frontier survival. The fort's security was designed primarily to keep Apache raiders out, not to prevent a territorial ranger from entering. And Tom's official badge and his extensive knowledge of military routines got him past the sentries without raising suspicion. Colonel Matthews' office was located in the main administrative building, a 2-story structure that also housed the fort's communications center and official records. Tom picked the lock on the colonel's office door using skills he'd acquired during his less respectable youth, when survival sometimes required bending the law, and slipped inside like a ghost. Working by the light of a single candle, Tom methodically searched through multiple file cabinets and desk drawers, looking for any evidence of the illegal bounty payments. He found routine correspondence, supply requisitions, and patrol reports, but nothing directly incriminating. Then he noticed a portrait hanging behind the colonel's desk, a formal painting of President Harrison that seemed slightly askew. Tom's instincts told him to investigate further, and when he carefully shifted the heavy frame, he discovered a small iron safe built into the wall. Using skills learned during his Army Scout days, Tom carefully manipulated the combination lock. It took nearly an hour of patient work, but finally the tumblers fell into place, and the heavy door swung open. Inside was a collection of documents that detailed the full extent of Matthews' illegal activities, records of payments to civilian bounty hunters, correspondence about implementing a final solution to the Apache problem, and most damning of all, a letter bearing official Washington letterhead that authorized Matthews to use any means necessary to pacify the Apache population. Tom was copying the most incriminating documents when footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. The door opened, and Colonel Matthews stepped into his office, hand resting on his service revolver. "Well, well," Matthews said coldly. "The famous Ghost Walker. I've been wondering when you'd finally show up here." "Colonel Matthews, I'm here conducting official territorial business," Tom said, slowly raising his hands while keeping the documents. "Breaking into my office and cracking my personal safe." Matthews smiled without warmth. "That's a very interesting interpretation of official business, Ranger. I'm investigating credible reports of illegal bounty payments and unauthorized military operations," Tom said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Activities that violate both territorial law and federal military regulations." Matthews closed the door behind him. "The only law that truly matters out here is the fundamental law of survival, Ranger. The Apache are dangerous savages who need to be eliminated completely, and I'll use whatever methods prove necessary to accomplish that vital goal." "Including the kidnapping and torture of a chief's daughter?" "Including absolutely anything that works effectively," Matthews replied without hesitation. "You've caused me considerable trouble with your meddling, Ghost Walker. Those bounty hunters you killed were valuable assets working directly for me, and the girl you rescued was extremely valuable bait." Tom realized he was facing a man who had abandoned all pretense of military honor. "Who told you I was coming here tonight?"